Hello and welcome to this edition of Bayou Time. I'm your host, Keith Weisheit, licensed clinical social worker. Thank you so much for joining us. However you may join us, we appreciate it very, very much. Very glad to have with me Representative Terrebonne Parish, Chris Pulaski. Chris, thanks for joining us, man.
Thank you for having me, Keith.
Appreciate it. So look, let's just kind of start with kind of where we are. You know, there's so many things out there that are true or not true, and you've been out in the community, which I appreciate, kind of traveling around the parish and kind of seeing where things are. Let's start a little bit of maybe a status or State of the Union with Terrebonne Parish.
Sure. As many know, we have, let's start with the base camps. We have 4 base camps throughout the parish right now. We have one in Dulac, which is a 100-person camp. We have one in Chauvin that's a 100-person camp. We have one in Montague that's 200-person camp. And then we have one in Houma along Scott Lane that's a 100-person camp. Now, the 3 in the lower bayou communities, they're operating right now anywhere between 25 and 50% occupancy.
Oh, wow. That's kind of good news.
The one it's good and not good for different reasons.
Okay.
The one in Houma is at 100% capacity, and we've requested, and currently as we're sitting here today, they're working on an expansion of that camp for another 100. So there'll be 200 at that Houma location, and that's on Scott Lane, which is behind the Bayou Towers building.
Right.
We also have right now a request in for a 50-person camp on Williams Avenue, the old Legion Park site.
Right.
And then just this week we started putting together a request for a camp at the Air Base Park on the east side. The ones down the bayou, the reason why I say it's good and bad, we put those out because we were finding that the temporary shelters that we had in town weren't at full capacity. And so there was some concern about, well, why is that? We know that there are people in need of shelter right now. They're living in tents. They're living in their car. So one of the reasons that was given to us is that people were reluctant to leave their private property.
Sure.
And so that's why we went to the state and requested these in lower bayou communities, and they set them up, but they're still not at full capacity. So I guess the danger in that situation is if they're not being utilized, then how long are they going to be out there for?
Right, the fear of losing them.
Right, and so if we have a need, and that need is the solution, albeit it may not be the most desirous, it's still better than being in your car, being in a tent. But if they're not at full capacity, then those resources may be allocated to other locations, or what we may likely see is that they'll consolidate them into one camp instead of having 3.
Right.
But right now, we're just watching the numbers daily and seeing how it goes. Just to clear up any misunderstandings about those base camps, I mean, they are not the type of situation where once you're in, you can't go anywhere. I mean, you can come and go as needed. They have wraparound services, food, laundry, restrooms, showers, and recently Parish President Dove and the council had requested to the state that those wraparound services be made available to residents.
Sure.
Even if they're not occupants, but the people who are registered occupants would be given priority for those services. But they were really, I think the message is they're intended to be a temporary shelter. They're just serving that purpose like the municipal or Dumas would in most events.
Right.
Kind of the same situation. We realize that the travel trailers, the state's travel trailers, and FEMA's direct housing program is slow to get up and running. And I know we'll be talking about that.
Right.
So the base camps were intended to fill that gap, but they are there, and there's a lot of services available.
Can we talk a little bit? I know we've seen some of the pictures, but kind of just in general, what's available to them in that base camp?
Sure.
For that.
So the housing is congregate housing. It's group housing. Now, each camp is operated by different vendors, so the actual housing type is going to vary.
Okay.
Most of them are large tents, and then the tents are subdivided into smaller areas. So, anywhere between 8 and 12 people per pod, if you will. Chauvin, the tents are individual 8-person tents. But if you're a family of 10, 8 is what they have set up for because of COVID. Normally, those tents could hold anywhere between 20 and 25 people.
Right.
So if you have a family of 10 or 12, they'll add additional cots in those tents for you,
Right.
so you would have your own tent essentially. Scott Lane's a little bit different in the sense that the units are more of a modular type housing unit,
Right.
and they have 4 people per unit. And the set that's there now is chiefly bunk beds, like 2 sets of bunk beds. But in the expanded areas, because we have folks who have other needs, like maybe they have a certain disability or elderly or what have you, I mean, you can't climb into a top bunk. It's difficult for some. So we've requested accommodations for that, so like double beds instead of bunks, handicap ramp access to all these.
Right. And so I appreciate that in talking about how they're different, but they're similar in different areas.
They're all similar in the sense that they're temporary shelters. Temporary housing is sort of the next phase, if you will, for recovery for those survivors who've been displaced. So traditionally, the housing has come in the form of FEMA travel trailers, the FEMA trailers, the infamous FEMA trailers from Katrina.
Right.
And that program usually takes anywhere between 4 to 6 months to get ramped up and running. So for that period of time in between, traditionally, those in need have been offered things like hotel vouchers. Well, unfortunately with Ida, most of the hotels in our region were destroyed or damaged, and then those that weren't were occupied and still are occupied by first responders, critical facility crews doing repairs. So the state, after Laura, recognized that same thing, and so they created this temporary housing program of their own, which is essentially intended to fulfill the gap between 0 to 6 months. So they get deployed a little faster, they get procured and brought to the region a little faster, and then delivered and occupied ultimately faster than, say, FEMA's, but it's a shorter term. So FEMA's program starts up, I mean, we're starting to see some units showing up now, but 2 months out, but 4 to 6 months is really when it gets up and running. So the idea is if somebody's still in a state unit, a state travel trailer, but they're eligible to stay in the program or move over into FEMA's program, they'll just transition over.
Okay.
It could even be that the trailer that they're in, although it began as a state's asset, the state procured the travel trailer, that travel trailer could also transition over and become FEMA's travel trailer.
So it could be seamless, if you will.
Correct.
If that, and I know nothing is really seamless in the process, but it's people need to understand that there is a process.
Right.
And that the state is doing everything that they can to get those resources, and here individually we're trying to get those out, and people drive by and they see trailers and they wonder why aren't they somewhere?
Yeah.
Well, it's a process, and we need to make sure that there's a whole lot of safety measures that take place for getting that trailer where it needs to be, and based on what the need is.
Right. This is the first time the state has entered into this type of program. So, kudos to them for taking that initiative. And the process you mentioned. So let me just briefly go through that process.
Okay.
So the state goes out and procures the travel trailers. They're buying them from all of
everywhere.
the commercials you see on TV and all that. That's where they're getting them from. They're getting them not just in Louisiana, but surrounding states as well. And they're hauling them in. So we're seeing them being staged at the Civic Center. The Civic Center is one of 3 staging areas in the region. So not all travel trailers at the Civic Center are guaranteed to stay in Terrebonne. They may be going to our neighboring parishes, Lafourche, Assumption, St. John, wherever they're needed. Stands to reason a lot of them will stay here, but maybe not all of them. Once a trailer is brought to the Civic Center, through the process whereby we took in names, the state's registering, everyone needs to register with the state as well, those trailers are then deployed or delivered to the private resident. Once they go on site, then they have to be installed and hooked up to utilities. So there's some time there associated with that. After that's done, a COVID crew has to go in and clean it all out. They have to sterilize the whole thing. Then the paperwork for that survivor has to be completed with the state for the right of entry agreements and all those kinds of things. And then finally, there's the final walkthrough, and they turn over the keys. So from the time a travel trailer gets delivered to the time it's actually being occupied could be anywhere from 5 to 7 days. It just depends, and as the process or program gets further along, that time frame will likely shorten. But right now, as it's getting up and running, that's what we're seeing. As of today, we have, I think, 179 travel trailers have been delivered, and we have 43 that are occupied. So that's a huge step from where we were last week.
Right.
But we still have a long way to go.
Well, and people don't necessarily realize the time that it takes, and that 5 to 7 days, there is the difference between 43 and 179.
Right, and there's, you got to get once the electrician, and by the way, it's the state that's paying for this, or FEMA. Please do not go and hire your own electrician. That's
right.
Part of the deal that the state has. They provide all those services. They haul and install. So, but once that's done, I mean, the inspections have to happen, yes, of course, but then the utilities have to come in and actually energize and install the meter, and in some instances, that takes a while too.
Right, and those resources we know have been limited over this time in our recovery process, and the number of electricians that are needed in our area. I mean, that's a part of that, the process and part of that delay that people just need to understand.
Yeah.
It's not just, well, Chris said I was getting a trailer. It's just not how that works. And so, again, that's through the state. It's different because it's a need that they identified with Laura last year in Lake Charles. The state put some things in place, and now we have this option that we wouldn't have had before, that the state is kind of stepping up and providing that.
That's correct.
So if people are interested in temporary housing, which are the trailers that are available, they need to go and apply, right? They need
Correct.
to do that. And the best way to do that, the number that you've given me, 1-844-268-0301. I'm going to give that number one more time, 1-844-268-0301, and that's how people can get on the list to get temporary housing, and they do an application form, right?
That's correct. And even if you've already submitted your name and information to the parish, I know a lot of people are doing that early on. Just everyone needs to be aware that the state will still require you to register. So do yourself a favor, go ahead and get that step crossed out and register.
And again, that number once again, 1-844-268-0301. And that's a little bit about how people can get temporary housing. I know people are trying to get back in their houses. They're trying to get work done. Let's talk a little bit about these permits and what the parish has been doing to make it a little easier for everybody to do that.
Sure. So as with most events that happen, one of the things that we want to make sure of is that people understand that while permits are still required, we want to encourage people to get those permits, so the fees for the storm-related permits are waived. And for IDA, it was for is for residential and commercial renovations or repairs that are associated with the storm. Those have been waived, and that includes the trade permits that are associated with that as well. So electrical reworks, that kind of stuff. That waive doesn't apply to new construction. So if we're planning on building a new commercial or residential building, the normal fees will still apply. But for storm-related repairs, those fees have been waived. And I believe the original executive order was up to December 1st. The 90 days is sort of the standard.
Right.
But as you know, every event's a little bit different. So if we still see that there's a need out there, I could certainly see that date could be extended. But at this point, it's December 1st.
December 1st for doing that.
We have waived other, modified or revised, like, say, for example, the zoning to allow for these travel trailers to be placed in zoned areas that normally would prohibit that. And that's through April 1st. So that kind of tells me that perhaps we might see the permit fees. We could, see that being extended as well. Just as a quick note, that zoning waiver for travel trailers, that does not apply to mobile homes. And the reason why is because mobile homes have the tendency, they're more of a permanent solution.
Right, than temporary.
Right. So for travel trailers, I mean, if it's in there, okay, fine, because it'll get hauled off, or it may end up just becoming the personal asset of that occupant,
Right.
To use as recreational vehicle.
Right.
But mobile homes tend to become a more permanent solution, so we want to make sure that they're in the proper zone to begin with.
And distinction between those two. And now, speaking of that, let's talk a little bit about RAMP. This is something that's really unique that we want people to see. And we're going to put that up on the screen so people can see what it looks like on the parish's website. So that's the Recovery Assistance and Mitigation Planning Survey.
Right. So RAMP, we love our acronyms in government.
Sure.
So RAMP is the division of the Planning and Zoning Department that I think most people can relate. When you go down and you go down the bayou and you look and you see all the homes that have been elevated.
Right.
That's one of the big programs that we've had over the years. And it's just not down the bayou. I mean, they're in Homa and other parts as well. But we have a full division of people that work on mitigation planning and recovery assistance. So what does that really mean? So that's what this survey is about. So thank you for showing that. tpcg.org is our website. So that survey is on there. And what we're trying to get information on is what sort of programs do the people of Terrebonne Parish need?
Right.
I mean, yes, we have the programs that traditionally we offer, the elevations, the reconstruction, buyouts, that kind of thing. But we want to find out target a little bit deeper than just that. And so that's what that survey is intended to do, that can then guide us in terms of finding different funding streams, whether it be FEMA or others, and then putting together the applications for these programs to FEMA. So we're the ones who cook up the program. We decide what the specifics are, and then we submit that application to FEMA or the state, and then they're the ones who review it and then award us that application or that program. And when I say award, not only, yes, we approve your program, but we also like it so much, here's how much money we're going to get.
Right.
And the better program we have, the more money we get. And we're fortunate that we have a very talented and experienced staff in that division. Jennifer Gerbasi has been at that helm for a long time, and I think the state and FEMA know her well, and we've got a good reputation, and we want to make sure we keep that.
And quite frankly, it's the best way for people to say this is what the need is to you, parish government, so you can say to state and national government, this is what we need based on what the people have said.
That's correct. That's exactly right.
And so it's one of those things where a lot of times I think people think, oh, well, big government's just going to throw money at things that don't necessarily need. This is people's way of saying this is what we need. Go in, fill out the survey.
Right.
And it's the best way to do that.
Whether it's your house or it's other infrastructure, transportation, roads, downtown, you name it, that's what it's for.
Go and love it. Chris, I thank you so much for all of your time and certainly for all the information that people need to get out there. We appreciate it.
You got it. Thank you, Keith.
All right. That'll do it for us, guys. Don't go anywhere. A whole lot more local programming when we continue.